Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part, and Mary has chosen that good part which will not be taken away from her. Luke 10.
Welcome back to the Mary and Martha podcast, where we talk about a life of consecration for young women in the Coptic Orthodox Church. We are back again with Demiana Anastasia. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome again.
Thank you for coming again.
Thanks for having us. We're very happy to be here for a second time. And this time around, if you haven't seen the first episode, Mother Anastasia was talking about kind of her experience coming into monasticism, as well as some other things. So go check out that video if you haven't seen it yet. In this episode, we are going to talk about monasticism, or being a nun in general terms. So my first question is, how did monasticism for women even come to be?
Well, we know the father of monks is St. Anthony. From what the church fathers wrote for us about his life, we know that he had a sister. And before he left to the desert, he went and dropped off his sister to a house of virgins. Mm-hmm. So that's one information we have about that. We also know that St. Pachomius had a sister as well, and she was also dropped off at a house of virgins, and this is where the same lifestyle of the communal life began. And we also, of course, have our Saint Demiana, where if you haven't read her story, please go read it in the Synectarium. But she was also a young girl, 19 years old, was not pursuing marriage. She wanted to live for Christ, and so her father built her a tower, and from there, one virgin after the other came, and it ended up being her and 40 virgins, and then they were martyred at the end. And that's another person who was a role model towards monasticism. So this is what we have as the main big figures in the church for monastic life for females.
Okay, very nice. And we are in St. Mary and St. Demiana Convent in Georgia. Is this the only convent in North America?
No, we have this convent. We have a convent in Ohio. We also have a convent in California, and we have another convent in Canada. So there's a bunch of convents now in North America for females.
Lots of blessings.
Thank God.
Thank God. And what is the process or the different stages of someone who wanted to come and be consecrated in the convent?
So the stages starts off with, most of the time they come on a retreat with a group. They get to see the convent. If the thought begins in their mind that they're thinking of pursuing this life, we encourage them to come on an individual retreat through the blessing of their father of confession. For a small period, just to test it out, to see how this life will be like without having your friends and your family or a group. If they do feel comfortable and they like it, we then recommend for them to go back, speak about it with their father of confession, and then come for an extended retreat. So maybe a week or two, depending on what their father of confession blesses them to do.
Yeah.
And that way, they get to spend more time in the convent. They would get to experience the monastic life, how we pray, how we do things. They would get to work with the nuns. They would get to follow the spiritual rule that the nuns basically follow. And so based on that, they could test themselves and see if this is something they seriously want to take as a commitment for life, or it was just a phase of enjoying that spiritual high and they want to think of something else. If they're adamant about this and they want to take this path and be committed to it, then they need to speak with their father of confession, who then contacts the abbot of the monastery with a letter of recommendation, and if the abbot approves, they would come, and from there the process towards consecration begins.
What is the abbot of a monastery?
The abbot of the monastery is the head of the monastery.
Okay.
So some monasteries have an abbot that takes care of it, and then some monasteries have the abbess, which is the head mother that is taking care of it. So every monastery has its different style.
Okay. And then how are the different stages? Because I know, as you just talked about, like the trial stage and all of that, but then there are also different levels of monasticism for women. So can you explain those?
Sure. So when a girl is committed and wants to take this, and she got the blessing of the Father of Confession, and the abbot approved, and she's going to join, she starts off when she joins by the title of a candidate. She is dressed in a black skirt and a white t-shirt and a white scarf. This is the period she gets basically introduced to the community, introduced to the lifestyle, and so on. When the abbot feels that she's ready, he's at peace, the convent's at peace with her, and she's growing, he then would call her up to dress her in the gray garb, which is the next step we call, she's a novice. Okay. This is when she gets her layman name changed, and she gets a new name. She doesn't know when, and there's no timeline to that. It all depends on the prayers of the abbot when God guides him to take this step. Then she stays as a novice in that uniform. She's now officially part of the community. She gets a cell. She gets a prayer rule she follows. She gets to work in a specific department. We call them obediences here. And then that period could be going from 3 years up to 4 years. Right. Again, all under the guidance and the prayers of the abbot of the monastery. Again, she doesn't know when she will be consecrated as a full nun. So this is the time where she's just trying to be watchful and living this life according to the rules of the monastic life. We always call the novice years as it's the time of engagement. Yeah. So she is allowed to leave any time in those 3 to 4 years if she feels like this is not really what she wants to pursue, or she changed her mind or whatnot. So there's nothing wrong in that. So we just call it, this is engagement period, and she's free to go back. Yeah. But once she takes her vows, and she is dressed in the monastic garb, this is what we call, it's a marriage. So it's a seal, and there's no divorce. So this is where she is fully consecrated as a nun, and that's where you see them dressed in black. So that's why nuns are dressed in black, novices dressed in gray, candidates dressed in white.
Okay, nice. And can you talk to us a little bit about the garb, like a little bit more? Like what consists of the monastic garb?
So the monastic garb for monks and nuns is similar in 3 things, except one thing is added extra for the nun. So monks or nun, they are dressed in the black garb, and that it represents poverty, basically. A life of we're not caring how we dress. You know, it's that simplicity life. Yeah. And the black represents death to the world. So it reminds the monastic every morning when they're putting on that black garb that they took vows to be dead to the world and to live for Christ, to live the spiritual life. The next part of the uniform is the cowl or the konsoa, which looks like this. And so it represents having it goes back to the vow of obedience, where we are putting on Christ. So that's why we have the 13 crosses represents the disciples and Christ. We remember every morning when we put them on that we are under the commandments of God and under the vows that we took, and that we are living under obedience to God's commandments and what He has asked of us. The third part of the garb is the chastity belt, and so that one is dressed, or we wear it under the black garb. And every morning when, this one is actually we don't remove it. We wear it at all times. Okay. And it also reminds us of not just the physical virginity, but the concept behind that we need to be careful with our senses, with what we see, what we hear, what we say, what we touch. So the life of chastity or virginity, like, is not just expanded to the physical virginity, but also being watchful to keep your senses chaste. And for the nuns, the veil. The veil is more, we consider as like an extra garb for modesty, but also it's a shield to the eye. So it makes us just focus on ourself, reminds us that we're here to focus on our prayers, not to be curious and look around and wonder what is this one doing, what is this one doing. So it's more of just like a shield to keep your eyes focused on what you came for and on your prayers.
That's very nice. And then you talked a little bit about like the gray and the black, like the difference between that shows the different levels. But you also mentioned that the black kind of represents like death. Can you talk to us about the ceremony for the consecration of a nun?
So to simplify it, when a novice is called up to become a nun, the first thing she's asked is if she's ready to read the vows. So there's 3 vows that she takes. There's a vow of poverty, vow of chastity, and vow of obedience. So some people wonder why these 3 vows, you know?
Yeah.
So if we look back at the temptation on the Mount for Christ, we look at the 3 temptations that he was fought with. First one was the devil told him, command the stone to become bread. That is basically the temptation of the lust of the flesh. The second the temptation that he was fought with was, throw yourself down, for it is written, he shall give you his angels to charge over you. That is the pride of life. And the last temptation was he was taken up on an exceedingly high mountain, and he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And that is the love of money. So let's look at that. Love of money, lust of the flesh, and we said pride of life.
Yeah.
So these are the 3 wars that the devil used as temptations to Christ. Now let's look at the vows. Vow of poverty, what does it focus on? So if you look at the lust of poverty is love of money, so
Yeah.
we're fighting that. Lust of the flesh, we're fighting it with the vow of chastity. And then pride of life, we're fighting it with the vow of obedience. And that's why these are the 3 vows that is focused for a monastic, because these are the main 3 passions that any human being actually gets fought with.
Yeah.
And so this is the main focus and goal. When we take these vows, we're trying to be watchful over these 3 wars, and again, to work on ourselves to reach this life of holiness. So that's why we have the uniform, the vows. The only thing extra after the vows that is taken, there's a whole ceremony. Like, you could actually read it on Coptic Reader. You could see what the prayers are prayed. But why we say death to the world, or why is it they're dead? Because the funeral prayers actually prayed on them. So that's we are reminded at that moment that you are dying from the world,
Yeah.
and you're becoming a new man, you know? So it's just like in Tasbih how we say in the midnight praises, take off the old man and put on the new and superior one.
Yeah.
So hopefully, if a monastic is focused on what the vows they took and the life they pursued, they would remember every morning as they put on the garb that they are fighting against the old man to become, through the grace of God, the new and superior one that God is planning for them to walk through this life of righteousness and holiness.
Very nice. Thank you. Omena, can you tell us a little bit? You mentioned that the name changes maybe a couple of times,
Twice.
I think. Twice.
So from candidate to novice, and then from novice to monastic, to being a nun or a monk.
Okay, and who chooses that name?
The abbot.
The abbot. Okay, so when you're moving on to that next stage, you get the new name.
So I'm done. But
Yeah,
the novice,
okay.
yes,
Yes.
the novices that are going to become nuns, their names are going to get changed until when becoming a mother, that name will be their name, the official name.
Okay. And then, what does a typical day look like for a nun in the convent?
So actually, the retreat schedule that you guys get is very much close to our lifestyle.
Okay.
The only difference is you guys have talks and activities. That time that you're not participating in with us is our time of prayer and finishing our spiritual rules. So our schedule is roughly the same, but it just changes from one nun to the other based on her spiritual rules and how she plans her day. But we start off every morning at 4 a.m. to do the midnight praises, which is a mandatory prayer. We all get up and participate together. On non-fasting days, we start the liturgy right after from 6 to 8. And then every monastic has that time as their quiet time. Then we go to our obediences, like I said, our work departments, and we work from 10 a.m. roughly till 12ish, 1, and then it's a small break again. We go back to work, or if someone finished their work, this is their time to finish their prayers in their cell. And then we gather together as a community at 5 o'clock to do the evening prayers. And then from 5:30 onward, every monastic has their own schedule. So some could go back and finish whatever work they didn't finish. Some could begin their spiritual rules. Some could be having that time as their own private quiet time. So that's basically how the schedule runs for the convent.
And is the spiritual rule is like a general rule that everyone has, or it's different per person?
So there's the general, like I said, the midnight praises, the
Yeah.
liturgy, the 5 p.m. prayers. But the specific rule of what each nun does in her cell, that's between her and her father of confession.
Okay. And then, how do you learn all the hymns of the church?
So The way we learn the hymns in this convent is we have a meeting once a week. We gather,
Nice.
and that's that we spend an hour learning a hymn. So we have the head mother that is responsible for the hymns. She would tell us in advance, like this week we're going to cover this hymn. Please like download the recording, bring your hazets, whatnot. So we meet once a week to practice together. But then, if a nun is interested in hymnology and wants to learn more, that's also in her free, like her private time in her cell. So she could spend more time learning hymns, and based on that, she could excel in learning more hymns if she desires. But as a community and what hymns we need to say together, we gather once a week and we practice the hymns of the season. So at least we could be united and we could be praising the Lord like with one voice.
Nice. You mentioned that there are some communal activities and some are on their own. Is this a typical structure for a convent?
I can only speak for my convent.
Okay.
But this is typically how our convent usually runs.
Yeah.
But that's what a communal life is all about, which is we go back. I know I mentioned St. Anthony and St. Pachomius, but there's also another father of monasticism, which is St. Macarius, which is basically how this convent runs. We have time for ourselves alone in our cells. We live that life of St. Anthony. And then we have the communal, which is St. Pachomius. And St. Macarius had the balance of both, where there's alone time, but there's communal time as well. So we shared that in our convent, having those two lifestyles.
Yeah. We mentioned earlier as well that when you become a nun, like that's it. That's for good. It's like a marriage. You can't break that. But can you physically leave the convent at all, or?
Again, under the
work?
permission of the abbot and his blessing. We can't just like wake up and say, I want to leave the convent today and go out. The only two times the two events we're allowed to leave the convent gates with the blessing of the abbot would be for medical appointments or for, God forbid, immediate family health emergencies. So our abbot is gracious enough for us to go and to be with our families, immediate family, so mom, dad, brother, sister, in emergencies where they need a hand. So we're granted to go and help at that time. Other than that, this is our home, so we do everything in this place. We don't cross the gates to do anything else other than live the life that we came for.
Yeah. And that's amazing. It's a blessing. Okay, Amina, so you said that as a nun you can only leave for family emergencies, immediate family emergencies, or medical. But how do you get groceries? How do you get necessities?
Well, God provides servants that want to help and volunteer. So we would get servants that would be in touch with the convent saying that they want to help. And so the administrative mother who's in charge of the financials of the convent reaches out to them with the list, and this is how like they end up helping by buying the stuff for us and they bring it over to the convent. But for us as individual nuns, we have a mother who's in charge of the storage or the needs basically for every nun. So we just get in touch with her when we're in need of something, and God always provides. I don't think there was once we ever needed anything and it was not provided. So this is usually how the system of the close community works.
Thank God. And then what work do you do in the convent as the sisters or mothers?
So every nun is assigned a certain obedience. There is bakery, there is kitchen, there is bookstore, there's church, hymnology, handmade, leather, woodshop.
Oh,
So
wow.
there's different departments by the grace of God in the convent. And again, based on the spiritual father and the abbot of the monastery, he's the one who assigns where every nun is going to be assigned where to work at a certain period of time.
So it rotates.
Yeah, it rotates, but
Okay.
we don't have, there's like no exact time when do you rotate, but this is how the system usually goes.
Yeah. And then when one enters the convent to be consecrated, are they assigned like a spiritual guide or someone to help them kind of get through that process?
Yes, the abbot has assigned certain mothers in the convent who are the spiritual guides for the novices, and they're the ones who are responsible, like you said, when they enter, the novice enters or the candidate enters, they sit with them, they mentor them, they teach them, they see what their needs. So they're basically a support and a guide for them throughout their candidate years and their novice years until they're basically on their feet. and ready to take their vows and pursue and like live the monastic life.
And then do you serve one another, like in the convent? Say like someone's sick or needs something specific, are you the one that would do that for them, or?
No, there's no specific one, but it depends on what the need is, you know, like let's say someone is sick. So we know we can contact the mother in charge of the kitchen to let them know that we have a mother or sister is sick, and she would take care of like making them a meal. We also have a mother who's responsible for the medications and whatnot. So we contact her to let her know if there's someone sick. But if there's something from our end that we can do, I mean, service is service, right? So God was clearly, it was like, I was sick and you took care of me. I was hungry, you fed me. So we kind of live that commandment amongst each other. So of course, if I see a mother or a sister is sick, I don't need to be in charge of a specific department to serve, you know. A simple note on her door to feel better, asking if she needs anything, providing a small snack or something that she likes at her door, just knocking on her to making sure she's okay, or she needs a hand to walk to church or whatnot. So that's how we take care of each other and make sure that we're doing okay.
Nice. And then we also talked a little bit about how prayers are communal. Do you, as the nuns and the sisters in the convent, do you do any other activities that are communal?
We have also Sundays we eat together. So this is we call it the agape meal. So we do it after the liturgy. We would have our lunch meal together, and that's where we all gather together in silence. And one mother stands and reads the Paradise of the Fathers. Wow. So that's something definitely is traditional from how the monastic life was from our church fathers. So we just kind of we're keeping up with that. We also, like I said, we have our hymns classes. That's another communal activity. Sometimes we have a guest priest or a guest bishop that visits the convent. So we gather with them and we sit and we get a spiritual talk ourselves from them. Nice. And sometimes if 2 or 3 or 4 mothers want to sit together and do a Bible study or finish a spiritual book or whatnot, this is also like possible. So the communal life is definitely seen in a scheduled prayer time, but there's also activities on the side where the community gathers together to participate in that unity together.
Nice. We talked about how when someone becomes consecrated as a nun, they're given a spiritual rule. What is a general spiritual rule that one might be given? So
the general spiritual rule that would be given would be, by God's grace, we're expected to finish the whole entire Agbeya, so from prime all the way to midnight, which takes about 3.5 to 4 hours. So the nun has to be wise with her schedule and figure out how she's going to split up her time to be able to fulfill the prayer rule. The other thing would be Bible, which would be most of the time the general would be 3 chapters a day, and then a number of prostrations given by the Father of Confession to her specifically, and as well as a spiritual book, depending on where she is in her spiritual state. The Father of Confession could recommend certain spiritual books that she should read and how many pages a day basically she should finish. So that is the general like spiritual rule for a monastic. Next to, of course, the communal prayers and the work and all the other things that we mentioned from before.
Yeah. So Amina, final question. I always like to ask about the patron saint of the church. And so we know that Saint Demiana is the patron saint of this convent. What is one characteristic that we can take from her life that we can apply to ourselves?
I think the very clear lesson that we could take from Saint Demiana is her perseverance of fighting the good fight. You know, like, she's a 19-year-old girl. She had a whole life in front of her. She was like, she had plenty of options, you know, but she was so focused on her salvation. And not only that, she was also focused on growing close to the Lord and like walking that path of holiness. And then when the time of persecution happened, she was bold enough to tell her father, like when he denied Christ, that I would have rather heard that you died than for you to deny the faith. Like that boldness, that fighting for your faith, fighting for your spiritual life, fighting for your purity is something that we really need to take to heart and ask for her intercession to help us in that. And so this is something I would definitely give as a message to all our youth, that for like, besides monastic life, besides everything that she did in her life, besides the martyrdom, besides all that, it's her life of fighting the good fight. We need to persevere to fight the good fight in our spiritual warfares. We can't just give in every time a temptation comes. We can't just make excuses every time, but we need to take a stand like Saint Demiana took a stand with her father and say no to sin. And to make a conscious decision, by the grace of God, I will do whatever it takes to overcome this sin. I will do whatever it takes not to fall into this temptation. I will do whatever it takes to change my group of friends and cling to spiritual friends and so on. So this is something I would definitely say would be the main lesson, at least for me, I take from her, especially like living the monastic life, is to go back and look at her life and remind myself, I need to fight the good fight if I want to reach true monasticism one day.
Yeah, love that. Thank you again so much for having us.
Thank you for coming. It was our blessing.
It was a blessing. Thank you.